if you as a leader are stuck somewhere between strategy and tactics and doing the job that you've employed smart people to do for you, you can't progress personally, and the business can't progress because of that. So I think that as a leader, you have to have the confidence to set that the strategic direction, strategic parameters, strategic objectives is probably a better way to put it. You have to make sure that the team's aligned, but then I believe to get the most out of your opportunity, you've then got to have a team that you're prepared to hand off to.
Definitely. Hey, welcome back everyone to the Lead Well, Live Well podcast, where we have authentic conversations with interesting leaders. I have a very interesting leader today, a good friend of mine, Josh Sparks. He has an incredible history, 25 years of CEO, MD work, and then in the advisory space. Josh, so good to see you today.
Thanks. Likewise.
Thanks for coming down, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I've been a Josh fan for a long time.
Straight back at you.
You've led some interesting companies like Sass and Bide and Mr. Brown.
Tom Brown
in New York, which would have been an extraordinary experience. How did you get into that space?
It's a great question. So I initially studied law at a high school, and I worked out very quickly I didn't want to be a lawyer. I started with Clayton Utz in mergers and acquisitions, and I think they disliked me almost as much as I disliked the profession. So I moved on fairly quickly. Spent 5 years in London working with a recruitment company that was branching off into HR strategy and consulting, and they'd recently gone public, and they were sort of on the M&A path. So I started off in sales with those guys, at fantastic training in sales, but ultimately started doing internal consulting for them as part of their M&A approach. So I was spooled up very quickly by some very smart guys and girls. And the CEO of that business, the founder and CEO, a guy called Robert Walters, took me under his wing. And it was an incredible experience. But I knew that I wanted ultimately to work in something more creative. I'd actually started a T-shirt company with a friend in high school. When I say T-shirt company, I think that's probably a gross exaggeration of the word company, but we trademarked Schoolies Week and started making T-shirts for all the different high schools in Brisbane. And we sold the trademark when I was at university, which is the only thing of any value whatsoever in the company. But I really enjoyed it, and it was a little bit of exposure to what a freewheeling entrepreneurial environment sort of looks and feels like. And it would be a stretch to call it part of the fashion industry, but we were making apparel. So I knew I wanted to get into something creative. I came back to Australia after a few years in London, and I started thinking about film, music, and fashion as the three potential points for me. And the film industry in Australia has always, been on and off and very dependent on government subsidy. The music industry at that point was going through the whole Napsterization. It was pre-iTunes, but it was clear that things were going to be difficult and very different. And that left fashion. So I started talking to different companies, and very fortuitously, Heidi Middleton, who was one of the founders of Sass and Bide, she's the Bide in the Sass and Bide. She was a couple of years ahead of me at high school. I didn't know her at school, but a girl that I went to law school with was one of her good friends. And so I was talking to Katie Benkin, my good friend, who's now very senior with Microsoft in Seattle, totally incidentally, but has done very well for herself. She said, "You got to meet Heidi." And so I went in and pitched, and they were very skeptical how a failed lawyer who'd spent 5 years with a recruitment company in London could possibly add value. But I guess I did an okay job. I convinced them to take me on. I had a very long probation period. I started as GM, and I was promoted to CEO about 6 months in. And it was, for me, it was an incredible experience. Sarah Jane and Heidi, Sass and Bide, had such a clear vision for what they were trying to do and incredibly creative. But the experience that I'd had both through law without realizing it, but then also through working with Robert Walters in London and unpacking and putting together a whole bunch of businesses that they were acquiring, I was a fairly quick study at what the levers were that we had to pull and improve. And in a fashion business, assuming that the founders have solved for brand, if they haven't got a clear sense of brand, that's a whole other problem. But assuming the founders have solved for brand, and we've got a pretty good approach to marketing and PR around that, then the levers that you have to pull, there's not many. It's really around, do we have suppliers that can deliver a consistent product that's going to live up to the promise? Do we have gross margin that is good? Can we scale the operation? And have we got a nice balance between channels across e-com, wholesale, and retail? And then it's really a matter of, like in any other business, of recruiting people smarter than you and starting to build a team.
Absolutely. I think that's so true in the fashion industry. I mean, I had a bit of a play in that space early on in the fabrics and supply side.
Yes.
And where I ended up with that was that I think the good fashion companies, yes, they were highly creative because that's the desirable piece.
Yes.
But they're also very effective at delivering that as well. So on trend, on time was kind of my pat sort of, you need to be on trend, absolutely creative, innovative, and a culture where people can express themselves in that way.
Yes.
But also you need to be efficient and effective and deliver on time. So on trend, on time was kind of where I landed.
No, I think that's spot on.
Yep.
And that balance of commercial and creative, which is true of really any business where brand is a significant component of their success. So I would say that's true of pretty well all business to consumer brands, other than those that are trading purely on price.
For sure.
The very low end. But even in B2B, I mean, brand is just so important. So having that balance of creative, and it's creative in brand and marketing, but also in sense of innovating the business model and innovating the service delivery model, et cetera, et cetera. You have to have that commitment to creativity, but absent the commercial guardrails, it can go off track very quickly.
And companies tend to be one or the other in that industry. So I helped start Fashion Industry New Zealand in an effort to try and get all these people together and sort of help them think through some of the commercial aspects, and also have a voice for the more fashion-orientated smaller companies in New Zealand.
Yes.
Because the only voice to government was like carpet and shoes pretty much back in those days. So it was good to kind of gather the crazy, the wild, and the wonderful in the fashion industry. They were amazing, great times.
That's a great thing to do. And I think industry bodies around the world that work with young designers have continued to attempt to do the same. Because it's
hard work.
It's challenging. It's challenging. I think if you think about it from the perspective of a designer, they've been typically working on this idea for a long time. I mean, when you talk to founders, they've often come up with the idea or some version of it in their teens. They may or may not have gone to design school or fashion school. Business, commercial, law, they're all very small components of any design degree if they're mentioned at all. So you're coming out with, you've got an incredible creativity, you've got a vision for a brand that you feel it has something important to say, and you kind of know who you want to say it to. But my goodness, where do you go from there? How do you structure a business that's sustainable and scalable?
Yes, and it's just a different skill set, isn't it? I think
it is.
And having people like yourself who can bring that level of commercial expertise must have made a big difference.
I loved it, and I think you see it in
space.
You see it in other spaces as well, where someone who can speak the language of both camps and who has. I mean, I think one of the reasons I was so attracted to the fashion industry, or really, was looking at multiple different creative industries, is that I think I'm probably a failed creative at heart. Like there's a sense of, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, it makes two of us. I'm the same. Frustrated designer.
So I have so much empathy for their challenges and so much sensitivity to what they're trying to say. But at the same time, my skill set is a little more black and white. It's a little more commercial and legal oriented. But it's almost left-right brain crossover. You can have a foot in each camp, and you see it in technology companies where typically the leadership of great technology companies they're nowhere near as technical as the technical teams, but they have a real affinity for that mindset and a real empathy for the way they work. But at the same time, can marry that to a deep commercial skills. So I think that ability to kind of have a foot in each camp, speak the language of multiple camps, is a really important component of great leadership.
Definitely. Because the culture becomes very important, because those sort of two teams, that on trend, on time.
Yes.
The on trend piece is very different culture to what you need for the efficient, effective.
100%.
And trying to mitigate between those two is it's not easy to do well.
No, it's not. And there's all these sort of cliches that we use, but they're cliches for a reason because they're accurate. But creativity loves constraints, and if we put commercial constraints around a design, anyone can design a beautiful ball dress for $8,000. But can we produce a dress that is going to look and feel and give the same emotional benefit to the purchaser as that $8,000 dress for $500 or $600 or whatever it is? So I think great creatives and motivated and inspired and managed in the right way with an understanding of what those commercial constraints are, often do their very best work because they have the framework within which they are painting. The canvas has borders.
Yeah, definitely.
They've got to express everything they want to express and create that emotional connection and that consumer love within the borders of that canvas.
I like that.
And that's it's not a bad way to think about it.
No, that's good. I think good constraints they boost innovation.
Yes.
Time is another one.
Time.
Fashion industry time, if you don't get your samples out with 100%. A certain time range, etc., it becomes an issue.
Yes.
So we used to have here's the deadline. Whatever the range looks like at this point in time, we're taking it off you and giving it to the people who will make it all happen.
Yes.
And they were sort of horrified that always up to like 4 o'clock in the morning trying to sort everything out. But there was a deadline. There was a line. Yes. Whatever it looks like, we're going to go to market with it.
Absolutely.
And so the pride of the designer, the creative input and everything, where they really wanted to make sure that was in the best possible space.
Yes.
But if there was no time constraint, just kept going.
100%.
Forever.
And you speak to, I've got a couple of friends who are writers, that they need deadlines. Designers need to understand, look, how many designs are we putting down the runway of the catwalk? How many go into the assortment for David Jones or Harvey Nicks or Nordstrom's or whoever? What are our price points? What fabrications can we use to hit those price points? There's, I think you can take that too far and kind of suck the creative love out of the room.
Sure.
And it's finding that balance so they're educated enough to be really effective within those constraints and as creative as they can be, without trying to take someone who really wants to be painting canvas and lecturing them via an Excel spreadsheet.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's a balance. So I liked your, guardrails. I think that's a good analogy.
Yes.
For that. And then you ended up in New York. How did that happen?
I did. So I was married at the time to Julia Baird. She was offered the role of deputy editor of Newsweek. And so I was very happily beavering away at Sass & Bide. And I think I would have stayed there probably indefinitely, as long as they would have kept me. But I wanted to support my new wife's dreams of a move to New York. So I arrived with really no contacts. I had a couple of contacts. Rob Hazen and Steve Marks, actually, who went on to found Guzman and Gomez here in Australia. They were our distributors for Sass & Bide.
That was a big listing.
Yeah, a very, very impressive listing. I mean, those guys are amazing. They've done such an incredible job.
Yep.
They were distributing Sass & Bide in the US. They were distributing a few Aussie fashion labels at the time. That they had a couple of different businesses, and that was one of them. So I had a couple of contacts through Rob and Steve. Rob was they were both very supportive, but there was still a lot of door knocking involved. I had to go out and find new clients. And over a period of time, I was fortunate enough to win a couple of assignments. And one of them was a turnaround of a brand called Truvada, which is a West Coast brand. And it had won about 18 months previously Anna Wintour's Vogue Fashion Fund Award for Emerging Designers. And at the time, that was not quite the kiss of death, but it was and not always a great thing for the design. It was a wonderful thing from the perspective of industry recognition, particularly from someone like Anna, but it was very difficult in the sense that you would instantly then be assailed by buyers all over the world who wanted your product. If you didn't have the supply chain, if you didn't have the balance sheet to support it, if you didn't have the financial controls in place, et cetera, a lot of these brands were very quickly going off the rails. So we successfully turned around Truvada. That led John Whitledge, who was the founder of that business, to speak to a couple of people, including Anna, about what I'd done. Through both that connection and another completely random connection, a guy who worked with ABC Disney, who's now one of my closest friends, that I met through Julia at Newsweek. He also knew Tom Brown. So there were a couple of pointers to Tom that I was someone he might want to speak to. He was still extremely resistant to the idea for about 9 months. He said, what could this guy from Australia who'd worked in women's possibly have to offer me? But eventually he agreed to a dinner. We just instantly hit it off, and we couldn't be more different in so many ways. But it was clear to me that he was a truly brilliant designer. He'd already had enormous creative and critical success, but commercially his business was very troubled. He'd been poorly advised by a number of people who I guess were in my position prior to me arriving, but also others around him, just taking advantage of his early success in ways that were really harmful to the business. So I started consulting. He offered me the role of CEO, and I still remember going home to my wife at the time and telling her that I'd just been offered this amazing job. as CEO with this incredible brand. And she knew enough about the business at the time to say, Josh, he's got 4 weeks of cash left. This does seem like a hollow victory.
That's 4 weeks employment. That's fine.
So, but I believed in him. And we then sort of proceeded to work 6 or 7 days a week for many, many months. And we turned it around. And it was lots and lots and lots of little things. I'm regularly asked what was the one thing that turned around his business. And it wasn't one thing. But going back to something we touched on earlier, Tom is a brilliant designer with a very clear vision for his brand. He deeply believes he has something incredibly important to offer his audience. And he consistently innovates on that season on season while staying true to that original mission. And we talk about this a lot in branding, that he has incredibly consistent, like the brand promise, personality, and positioning 100% consistent. But season on season, he innovates in the most unexpected ways.
Right.
So he's almost like, if you think of the 3-act play with the hero of the narrative, that hero has a personality that you connect with early in the film or the play or the novel. And you trust and you become confident because of those personality traits that you find appealing. His character is his character. But the reason we want to engage with him, act after act, scene after scene, he or she, I should say, is because they go on a journey and they face down different dragons and they learn different things about the world and different things about themselves, and they experience the highs and lows of life. But the character of the brand, or the character of the character, is consistent. But the journey involves a whole bunch of unexpected twists and turns. And if we think about branding in the same way, it can be quite helpful, because there's nothing worse than the trust and confidence break that you get when someone acts out of character. When you hear someone say, that's just not him, or I can't believe that she acted that way, and trust plummets. So we attach ourselves to brands, good brands that are very clear about this, because they have a consistent promise and they express that promise through a personality that's very consistent. But of course, like the individuals that we enjoy most in our lives, they're on a journey and they're always learning and they're always developing, they're always changing, and they're encountering and slaying new dragons. So it's a good way to think about it, particularly in my industry, but I think across the board with branding. Consumers want the consistency of a partner who they trust.
Yes.
At the same time, they get bored and they're always looking for the new thing. So for a brand to sustain over time, it's about how you evolve the narrative while staying true to your promise and personality, who you really are.
That's great. That's a good insight.
You're on an adventure.
Yeah. So the DNA of the brand remains the same, but the expression of that can change over time.
Absolutely. And indeed, the customer wants you to express it differently over time. And they give you permission to play, that old cliche, permission to play in different geographies, different markets, different categories, because they want to see you grow. They want to see you succeed because they like you and they trust you.
Part of the tribe.
Yeah.
For sure. So you've had this, great experience with a couple of major brands. Sounds like you just knocked on doors until you got a response, which I always admired about you. You have a lot of endurance, and productivity has always been incredibly high.
It's the ability to take rejection.
That's right. Yes. It's part of the game, isn't it?
It is.
Definitely part of the game.
Big part of the game.
I think a lot of people give up early.
Yeah.
And don't see the fruit because of it.
Yeah.
That persistence is super important.
Yes.
So any leadership lessons? I mean, you talked about with your people that you partnered with. So vision's super important, creating the right environment.
Yes.
Surrounding yourself with people who have different skill sets to you.
Yes.
Talked a little bit about that. Anything else that you think is a real leadership key for you and some of the success you've had?
I think there's a bunch, but I think if I think about the ones that I come back to, both in my own business and in the clients that I advise, my CEO at Urban Outfitters. So after we sold Tom Brown the first time, he diluted 30% down to a Japanese investor. At that point, I interviewed with Ralph Lauren and with J. Crew and Urban Outfitters, and ended up running with Urban Outfitters. So I moved down to Philadelphia. Glenn Senk was the CEO at the time, phenomenal guy. And they had a bunch of different coaches that worked internally at the Urban Group.
Big company.
It is, yeah. Their campus was amazing. It was on the old Navy shipyards where they built the Civil War ships in Philadelphia on the river. I think they had about 80 acres on the river. It was a phenomenal place to work. I loved it. But Glenn, I think he got this from one of the coaches who was an ex-Navy SEAL, but it's strategic clarity, tactical autonomy. So just being really clear as a leader that our job is to provide strategic clarity to the team and align them around that. And
Yeah.
alignment's a huge part of it. And then provide them with the tactical autonomy they need to do the job at their greatest capacity. So really engaging them to be the best they can be, and drawing a line between what is strategy and what is tactics. And I guess sometimes it's more of a Venn diagram with some overlap.
Sure.
Sometimes it's more of a true line. But I think, when I talk to clients about that, and they say, well, I can't trust the team I've got to execute with autonomy, even when I'm crystal clear on what we're trying to achieve strategically. We've aligned the team around the milestones and the KPIs to achieve that. I can't just hand over to them because, they don't get it, or they're not quite good enough, or they don't have the experience that I have. And my response is that, well, then you're just not ready to grow. Either the team you have isn't right, or you haven't given them the tools they need or the training and development they need. But you can't, no business outgrows its leader. I guess that's another one. No business outgrows its leader.
Yep.
And I think if you as a leader are stuck somewhere between strategy and tactics and doing the job that you've employed smart people to do for you, you can't progress personally, and the business can't progress because of that. So I think that as a leader, you have to have the confidence to set that strategic direction, strategic parameters, strategic objectives is probably a better way to put it. You have to make sure that the team's aligned, but then I believe to get the most out of your opportunity, you've then got to have a team that you're prepared to hand off to.
Definitely.
And that's easier said than done sometimes.
Absolutely. It's a big key though, isn't it? I think
It's huge.
I work with a lot of mid-size entrepreneurs that have got to 100 million-ish.
Yes.
200 million. They know everything that's going on in the business. They're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but they're not empowering their team. They don't understand how to do strategy. They don't understand really how to lead the team and let the team run the business.
Yes.
They haven't made that transition.
Yes.
And there's definitely a mindset piece of clear vision, clear strategy, empower the team to actually get the job done. It seems like such a small, simple thing, and yet it's incredibly difficult.
Yes.
I think particularly for entrepreneurs who they've built the business themselves, they've come from nothing.
Yes.
But it's a very big set shift.
Yes.
To say, okay, I've got this great leadership team around me now. I'm going to empower them, let them go. And there's a sense, I think, that they'll be out of control.
Yes.
There'll be chaos.
Yes.
And yet that's not what happens. You can move from compliance to commitment if you've got people that are very aligned, very capable, and able to execute.
Yes.
And it's such a simple concept that's so hard to get involved in the business.
It is. It's really hard. And I think we both encountered amongst our client base, I'm sure, that leadership mentality of, look, I'm a control freak. I got it to this point because I'm a control freak. Yep. Why on earth would I give that up? You know, so even though I've hired really smart guys and girls who have expressed a desire to really take ownership of their functional responsibilities and lead with a degree of autonomy, I can't help but get my fingers in their pies.
Yep.
And I think I've just never seen that end well.
No, you limit your capacity.
Indeed.
You want to go to the next level, that needs to be a mindset shift for sure.
You limit everyone's capacity, yours and that of your teams, and you just won't know what they're capable of without giving them a little bit of free rein.
Yep.
And to your point, this notion that results in instant chaos, that's not been my experience.
No, same.
So I see much more upside than downside in taking that approach.
I think because people think if you empower people, there's no accountability and responsibility. And yet with transparency and very, very clear outcomes,
yes,
you can absolutely bring those to bear, create a high performing environment where people feel empowered. They're adding their skill set to the environment, but at very clear outcomes, very consistent transparency. You can really move the dial for sure without 100%. Having that. It doesn't go fudgy. It actually goes a lot clearer.
100%. I completely agree.
Yep.
And that just speaking of kind of leadership lessons, I think, until you've experienced a high performance culture, it's difficult to grasp just how transformational that is. Yep. And the notion that I have one client in particular I'm thinking of when we first sat down, he said, look, we've got a really nice culture, everyone's really, really friendly. We've got no one ever leaves, but we're not hitting any of our numbers. and we're heading in the wrong direction. And I'm genuinely worried about the future of the business. And when we dived into it, it was a happy culture because it wasn't a high performance culture.
Yeah.
And the team had become very used to being, it was more like a hobby for everyone. It was being treated as just a fun place to be.
Right. Okay.
So I think, the other leadership lesson, I think, in terms of that is right up there in terms of the impact it's had on me and some of my clients, is that to build and sustain a high performance culture, you have to tolerate a certain level of failure.
Yes.
Innovation by its very nature is doing something that you haven't done before. Maybe someone has done it somewhere, but you haven't. And therefore you need to test a thesis, and a true test of a thesis, we don't know what the result will be.
Yeah.
So sometimes it'll go the way you want it to go and sometimes it won't. As a consequence of that, there is a risk that you are going to create a culture that believes that there are no consequences of failure. And that's different. Like that, if you're going to fail fast.
Yes.
Move on quickly. Tolerate failure when it's in the interests of proving or disproving a thesis. Do not tolerate failure beyond that.
Yep.
And as a byproduct of that, as a leader, you won't always be liked, but you should be respected in the sense that if you do your job properly, respect is a byproduct of that.
Totally.
But love and affection might not be.
No, that's right.
Because you're asking people I remember we had a reunion for Sass and By, like a 10-year reunion after I left. And it was really interesting. Of my 5 direct reports, 4 of them had started, all females, 4 of them had started their own businesses. They were all CEOs, which I was quietly very proud of.
Yeah.
And one of them started this conversation while the other 2 of the others were there, and they started nodding vigorously in agreement. And she was saying, "Josh, you were probably the most challenging person I've ever worked with, but I did the best work of my life."
Awesome.
And I was like, "Oh, well, that's nice to hear. But what specifically why?" And she's like, "I can remember, like, I'd bring something to you and you'd look at it and you'd say, 'Is this your best work?' And I'd say, not quite. And you'd say, 'Well, go back and give me your best work. I just want your best work. I don't want any more than that. I just want your best work.'"
Great question.
So it's, as a leader, I think in terms of creating strategic clarity and providing an opportunity for people to thrive, that's the tactical autonomy piece.
Yes.
The KPI, the milestones KPIs, that's the accountability piece. And I think if you are really holding yourself and everyone else accountable, then there's going to be difficult conversations. But if you come at it with a degree of empathy from the perspective that all you're doing is pointing out that they are capable of better, and you just want to see them deliver their best work, then I think it's an approach that I've seen work really well.
I like that. I think it's a great insight, good tool, and very true. Now you've had your own entrepreneurial run as well, which is we got involved in that project as well.
Yeah.
Fabulous run, great brand. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Thrive and that story?
Thrive, it was a great brand. We loved it. We did have a really good run. It didn't end as well as I would have liked it to have.
Yep.
And there's some great lessons in that too. But I think in terms of Thrive, so Thrive was really born out of my lifelong passion for health and wellness. And when I was living in the US, when I was in Philadelphia actually with Urban Outfitters, starting to feel the effects of, hitting 40 and just sort of starting to not quite feel the way I used to feel. My body wasn't responding to training quite like it used to. And the approach to nutrition and training and sleep and alcohol that had worked for me perfectly well up to that point just didn't seem to be working so well anymore. And I did a deep dive, and really it was my personal journey at that stage. There was no intent to turn it into anything bigger. But I spent a lot of my own time and a little bit of my own capital in chasing these leading lights of the wellness space around America and attending conferences and paying to have one-on-one time with them, and Mark Sisson, Rob Wolf, a couple of leading anti-aging doctors. And where I really got to was some version of keto or cyclic low carb was going to be something that I wanted to lean into. And after experimenting with it personally and seeing a massive improvement in my own health and wellness, my recovery from exercise, my energy levels, all of it, I started to imagine a world within which access to this knowledge, and specifically access to the nutrition that is a result of that knowledge, could be more widely available. And so that led me, when I moved back to Australia, It led me to think about, look, is this a supplement business? Is it a food business? Is it a medical advisory business? What does it look like? And at the time, I loved the idea of bringing it to the broadest possible audience. And it seemed to me like the most disruptive thing that we could do was probably at the convenience food level, at the fast food level. So I was thinking about food courts and airports and shopping malls, where typically the food choices that we're faced with are pretty limited and generally unhealthy in just about every single way. So some of the key insights of that whole paleo, primal movement, keto movement, cyclic low carb, whatever label we want to put on it, the big benefits come from eliminating processed foods, just the rubbish that comes in packets with 27 ingredients that you can't pronounce, let alone understand what they are. Yes. Cutting back, if not eliminating, added sugars. Ramping up the quality of protein and the quality of produce, and really kind of eating a very natural whole foods diet, eating until you are satisfied, not necessarily full. And then from a training perspective, and this is Mark Sisson's line, not mine, but I completely agree with him, is lift heavy things twice a week minimum. Sprint, once or twice a week if you can. So an all-out exertion, which could be on a rowing machine, it could be in a pool, it could be on a bike, but some sort of very high-intensity exercise, and then lots of walking. And the whole idea is that for a couple of million years, that's what we did without thinking about it. We didn't call it nutrition or exercise. We called it, finding dinner or, gathering the berries.
Or not being dinner.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Not being dinner, precisely. So it's the ancestral health movement is based on some pretty simple evolutionary science, and really what it boils down to is that the conditions within which we became the species we are today are very different to the conditions that we find ourselves living in. So to the extent that we can mimic just the highest impact elements of that more ancient environment, we're obviously not going to stop doing what we're doing, living with computers and under artificial lights. But if we can mimic some of those genetic triggers through the way we move, what we eat, the way we rest, et cetera, we can get a huge benefit, a disproportionate upside. And as business people, we're always looking for disproportionate upside. Yes. It certainly seemed appealing to me. It involved a relatively simple shift. I did find it difficult to give up some of the processed junk that I used to like, harder than I thought. I used to add sugar to tea and to coffee, and stopping doing that felt weird for a month or two, but not that long. I changed the way that I was training. I actually reduced my overall training volume. I used to do marathons and ultra marathons, stuff like that. I reduced my volume and lost fat and put on muscle. And so it works. And we found through Thrive, and what I loved about Thrive was getting back to Thrive, we successfully launched the business in partnership with Ross Lane, a gentleman who we both know and love, and a number of other investors over time. Ross was extremely supportive. We at one point had 12 restaurants in food courts around the country, Pitt Street and various Westfields in Sydney, on the North Shore, in Melbourne, Emporium, at Chadstone, et cetera, in Brisbane, in the city, down in Canberra as well. And we were reaching tens of thousands of people a week, and it was a great little business. We got a little distracted. We decided to get into the ready meal business. We had some venture capitalists invest, who were great guys, very well-intentioned guys and girls, great people, really well-intentioned, but wanted to see a much more rapid rate of growth than we were achieving at the time. And we as a board, me included, decided that this ready meal business was something we wanted to lean into. And we just messed up the economics around the ready meal business. We outsourced production of the ready meal, which meant that we were paying too much. Great quality product, but we're paying too much for it, and our margins were very slim. So ultimately, we exited the business. We did sell it, but not for what I think it would have been worth if we hadn't gone down that path. So lots of great lessons in there in terms of aligned investors, in terms of really thinking through how many things at once a small business can really pull off. How diversification is great at a point in time, but it's funny because this is a lesson I've shared with all my fashion clients for 20 years, but didn't follow in my own business, which is you got to be famous for something first.
Yes.
So it's always that question of, what do we want to be famous for? And if it's the world's best chino or the world's best sunglasses or a scent that drives women mad or whatever it is, we want to be famous for, the world's best Scotch whiskey, Aussie whiskey, Tassie whiskey. Do one thing exceptionally well, take the customer on that journey, and then to the extent you're looking at exploiting permission to play in adjacent categories, you do it in a risk-limited way. And I think we did have permission to play in the category, like we were generating revenue, good revenue, but the margin wasn't great.
Yeah.
And we'd invested too much and felt like we couldn't pull out. So some really sort of classic errors there. And as I say, it wasn't disastrous. It just didn't end as well as it should have.
Yes.
And I've got to tell you, the lessons you learn through failure, to whatever extent you want to define the failure, and clearly no one died, so it wasn't that bad.
There's a lot of people a lot healthier.
We all survived,
Yeah.
and we transformed a lot of lives.
Yep.
We ran competitions. We took obese people down to normal weight. We had people get off their type 2 diabetic medication. I mean, it was fantastic from that perspective. But we got some critical things wrong in terms of that, trying to do too much too soon, not fully understanding the economics of the adjacencies, and then being stubborn about not pulling out, not recognizing that, hey, we're not betting the farm if we,
It's so hard to ignore sunk costs.
It is.
Yeah. When you've taken a choice, because
it is.
Sometimes you got to push through and get out the other side.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to go, it's not going to work.
No,
and it's so hard to do.
It's incredibly difficult. But, I look back at it, but one of my first hires was my now wife, Steph, who is just, love of my life. And I met her through Thrive. We never would have met if we didn't do Thrive. Thankfully, there was no HR department. So
that's right. The HR department as well.
And now we've got Rosie together. Gorgeous 5-year-old Rosie.
Yep.
And we did transform the health and wellness of a bunch of people.
Definitely.
And I think in many ways it opened the door to a bunch of brands who are doing similar things.
100%.
But in more focused ways now. I think we're probably a fraction ahead of our time.
Definitely. I think you opened up a whole new market. Like you all gave it credibility.
Yeah.
And scalability as well. So I think you did a great job. One of the best presented brands, I've bumped into a lot of brands over the years.
Yes.
And one of the best presented brands and communicated brands that I've seen. Like just did a phenomenal job in that way that was done. I got to know you a little bit during that journey as well.
Yes.
And your level of productivity and resilience and the amount of things that you got done in the midst of that was just phenomenal. So I've been a Josh fan for quite a while. Met you through Ross Lane.
Yes.
You came and spoke at a YPO event that we had around sort of health and wellness, and particularly around eating and dietary sides of things.
Yes.
And you explained a lot about those things, and it really got me interested in that whole space. So
great.
Always been a fan, and it started a journey for me around health, wellness, getting a little bit older. How do I maximize my health span? And I've kind of gone down a few rabbit holes in that space and really enjoy it. I think it's great. And having sort of gone past 60, thinking, okay, I've got 20 good summers. How can I maximize that? And also with brain surgery and things in recovery, it's just been a phenomenal journey. But you've actually got me started on all those things.
Oh, that's great to hear.
And you obviously look after yourself, and you're doing well for your young age.
50.
So give us an idea of. I think we all know the basics. Sleep well, eat well, have good relationships, exercise, etc. Are there any sort of key principles in there that you use to sort of maximize your health span?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because we do know the basics. Most of us ignore them.
Yes, that's true.
But assuming that your audience understands the basics and have to various degrees put them into place. So they have some kind of sleep routine, and it sounds sort of corny calling it a sleep routine, but it works, like having some structure around thinking about your sleep and maximizing good quality sleep, that you are eating a largely whole foods diet, that you're not eating excessively, et cetera, et cetera. And from a training perspective, you're mixing up some low, steady, sort of really walking type cardio with some higher intensity cardio, and that you're lifting some weights. I think one of the insights over the last 10 years, and I was just fortunate to discover weights when I was a scrawny kid in high school, trying to get into the first 15. It was pure happenstance that I stumbled on this modality of training that's now considered absolutely critical for healthy aging. So I can't stress enough that if you're not lifting weights, I'm not talking about turning into Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever the female equivalent of Arnold Schwarzenegger is. We're not talking about posing on Instagram next to the squat rack. I'm just talking about doing what you can with the condition you're in now to improve your strength over time through lifting weights.
So true. So true. Underrated, I think.
It's grossly underrated. Nothing is better from an aging perspective than hanging on to muscle. Muscle is metabolically active, so is fat. They both release hormones. Muscle influences the endocrine system to release more of the good hormones, the stuff you want, growth hormone, testosterone, etc. And testosterone is important for men and women, not just men.
Yep.
On the flip side, fat converts testosterone into estrogen. You get a lot of men developing sort of man boobs and big bums, and fat distribution that is more typical of overweight women. That's related to too much estrogen. So fat is problematic for a bunch of reasons.
I feel like I need to just sit up a little bit more and take everything in.
Not at all. You're just fine. And women, too much estrogen is problematic for women too, from a whole bunch of reasons. So I think the notion that wanting to build muscle and lose fat is somehow ego related or it's about aesthetics. I think, for a lot of us, that's a nice byproduct. You look better, you feel better, you feel more confident. I don't think we should discount that, but just looking at just purely from the way the body functions and the impact of hormones, which are just so critical to our health. Lifting weights is critical. So anyway, parking that, assuming that this audience is across that and doing it to some degree, I think the next step is really about understanding what's going on at a chemical level in your body. So getting regular blood work, working with a doctor who can interpret that blood work, but also spilling up yourself a little bit, like get educated.
Yep.
It's funny. From a branding or a fashion perspective, we talk about it all the time that we're thinking about our brand every day for 10 hours a day plus. We're thinking about the product and the price points and the marketing, and we think about it all the time. The customer thinks about our brand for 5 or 10 minutes a month when they walk into the store. It's the same thing when you see a doctor. Now, the assumption is when you're seeing a doctor that they have your complete history in their mind at the time. They're totally focused on you. They're taking the time to work through all the various symptoms you're experiencing and what you're trying to optimize. It's just, that's an unfair expectation on the doctor.
Absolutely.
So to not take you've got agency in this, and to not take advantage of that agency by educating yourself a little bit just seems ridiculous to me.
That's so true.
And none of us would walk into a business and start deciding how to fix it without understanding the numbers.
Yep.
I would be able to work pretty quickly if I started coming in and prescribing solutions when I didn't understand what the problem was. So to start deciding how you're going to optimize your own health without understanding what's going on internally just seems a bit weird to me.
Yes.
So comprehensive blood work, full endocrine panel, understanding the state of your hormones, C-reactive protein is an inflammatory marker. There's lots of others. Lipid profile, LDL, HDL. It's not also understanding a little bit about cholesterol.
Yes.
That cholesterol is not the boogeyman that we've necessarily been led to believe. There's a big difference between large, fluffy LDL particles and small, dense LDL particles. And your state of inflammation, of which C-reactive protein is one indicator, has a massive influence on even if the small, dense LDL particles, which are the problematic ones, won't turn into arteriosclerosis absent inflammation. So stuff like that. It's just worth educating yourself a little bit.
Yes.
And these days, there's such great podcasts to do it.
So much out there, isn't there?
So much information. And you don't have to read medical textbooks anymore.
Yep. I found, so having gone down this particular rabbit hole, particularly over the last couple of years, that there is so much out there it's hard to sort of sort through. I've tried to stick with people who have some kind of credibility as far as what they've done. They're in neuroscience, graduate, or they're a doctor of this or that, away from the bro science.
Yeah.
Because you can go on TikTok and you can get some advice and it's not good.
Not always, no.
But trying to find that balance between but it's still a young science, I think, in so many areas. That,
it is.
People are pushing the boundaries, and it's good to explore all those things. It
is really good to explore, and I think if you take a diversity of sources, you can start to pull out what they're speaking to that's in common. So to the extent there is, everyone has their fringe passions, me included. The 80-20 rule is alive and well in this space as well.
For sure.
So you start looking, okay, what 20% of interventions are being consistently discussed across these various podcasters and authors and doctors and exercise scientists? Let's just focus on those and you'll get 80% plus
Yes.
of the upside. And then to the extent you want to start dialing it in, you start with blood work. You can move on to genetic testing. I didn't get a lot of insights out of genetic testing, but it's improving all the time.
Okay. Just done that, waiting for the results to come
Oh,
through.
really?
Yes. So I'm going to give that a go.
What are you expecting to, or what are you hoping to?
I have no idea. It's more a, I mean, the reason you do that, as far as the commercial, the way it's presented, is that are there things in your genetics that give you propensity for certain things? So, and you can address that from a supplement perspective.
Yes.
And that if there is something glaring in there, and if there's a supplement that actually sits in that zone, then that can actually be quite transformative.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's really just I'll give this a go. Slightly suspicious mind on what that might look like.
Yeah.
But yeah, just going to give it a crack.
I think it's definitely worth giving it a go because there are a couple that can be really impactful and that the science is 100% settled around.
Yeah.
There's also a bunch that the science is less settled around that I think will improve over time. And there's a lot of AI getting into this now. There's a lot of Silicon Valley money getting into it. So I think it will continue to improve.
Big market.
It will.
Everyone's got a new supplement. I quite liked Huberman's approach.
Yes.
I find that's really made an impact on my sleep.
Yeah.
I'm like the sleeping champion.
I've
More
heard
exercise required.
World's best, literally, according to the Whoop app.
But the whole circadian rhythm,
Yeah.
balancing dopamine, balancing, having some no blue light for an hour before you go to bed.
Yes.
Don't eat late.
Yeah.
Try not to have too much alcohol, although I do like a glass of wine.
Yes.
So I'm not a purist in that sense. But and in the morning, getting sunlight early. I don't have a plunge pool, but I have a very cold shower.
Yeah.
And that helps. So just some of these smaller things seem to really actually make a big difference.
And that's jumping back to the ancestral health movement. So everything that you just described there was part of our daily existence.
Yep.
So there weren't hot showers. You were getting up when the sun came up. There were no screens. So when we think about I remember reading somewhere that, I can't remember the name of the scientist, but someone very prominent in biology, and this quote just jumped out in an article, and he said, nothing in biology makes sense absent the framework of evolution. So if you're not looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, you're kind of missing context. That the context of our organism, we don't think about animal health or plant health without understanding the way the species have evolved. So in what environment has it evolved? You take it out of that environment, you put it in a hothouse, it's fine. You take it out of the hothouse, it dies within hours. So we're kind of little hothouse flowers. We need exposure to a certain level of stress.
Yep.
They call it hormetic stress, the stress that is net positive. And so, and there's books like The Comfort Crisis that go into this in a great level of detail.
That's fascinating, that side of things, isn't it?
It is.
The pursuit of comfort actually kills you.
It's not good.
No. And we do have an unnatural life is the way that I like to look at it. We need to be, more exercise, get out in the sun. I think retirement is an artificial construct. I don't think it's
totally.
It's see people deteriorate quite quickly off the back of a sort of sudden end to an active life.
Yes.
There's a big price you pay for that.
That sense of connection and contribution that you get from family and friends first and foremost, but also from our work. The notion that you can solve for 8 hours a day of feeling that sense of connection to something of real meaning and purpose, and that sense of contribution to others and their success and your customers and their happiness, or whatever it is. I think that you can suddenly solve for that with endless rounds of golf is just it's optimistic at best.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Josh, tell us a little bit about it's a fascinating conversation. I could actually talk to you all day about this.
Well, we don't have to stop unless you want to. I'm good.
Okay, why don't we just go a little longer? Tell us a bit about supplementation and what's been your approach to those sort of things.
So supplementation, and this is where I can get a little bit fringy because I have always been a big believer that there is a certain amount that we can solve for with better nutrition and exercise and sleep. And there's a certain amount of optimization that is different to just staying in the normal range of health. So when we look at the bell curve of what a normal population looks like, whether it's a blood marker or it's a vertical jump or whatever it is, I want to be as close to the high end of that particular range as I can possibly be. Which at 5'10" is not impressive on the vertical leap score, but on some of the others, I don't want to be normal in that sense. I want to be optimal. Now, I don't want to go above and beyond my genetic capacity, so I'm not talking about anabolic steroids or anything like that.
Not transfusing your children's blood. Or anything like that.
No. But I am talking about the sensible use of supplementation. And I don't, a bit like Tim Ferriss, I don't distinguish between a herbal supplement, a vitamin or mineral supplement, or a drug. They're all being used to create an impact in the body. So, massive doses of vitamin C, you're using vitamin C as a drug. So to me, it's a little bit nonsensical to say, well, I will only consider natural supplements because you're not using them in a natural way. So I'm open to peptides. I supplement with testosterone. I've been on testosterone replacement therapy for a number of years, since my mid-40s. That's been fantastic. But I also, there's a lot in the cornucopia of herbal medicine, vitamins and minerals, protein supplements. So I have a shake that looks Frankensteinian, I think, to most of my friends every morning, that is about 12 different supplements based on, and it's a coconut water shake. That is really dialed in to me and my specific objectives, but also some of my specific concerns. So we have genetically high LDL in my family. And last time I had it, or the time I had it tested, I realized I needed to make a shift in certain things. I was seeing a big increase in the small, dense particles. And as I mentioned before, inflammation's a big component of that. I had very low inflammation, so I wasn't panicked. But I was interested in exploring natural ways of bringing that under control. So I use, for example, high doses of niacin. Niacin was the go-to prior to statins, but it makes you flush. Most people don't like the flushing. You get really red and itchy for a few minutes after you take it. It decreases over time, and I don't really care. That level of discomfort doesn't bother me. It doesn't have any of the side effects of statins, and I wanted to explore it. That's been extremely effective for me. It's brought my LDL right down to a level, not super low, because I don't want it super low. I want it a high-ish, but not too high, and particularly around the particle. It's more large, fluffy, and less small, dense. So I also use a lot of fiber for gut health. I use a lot of fiber. It's also very good for appetite control. And I mix the fibers. So I use an inulin, I use a psyllium husk, I use a bunch of different fibers, Thioglad. I use a protein powder that's a blend of 5 different proteins, some very short in terms of their absorption and impact, some longer. So very short would be like a whey protein isolate. Longer would be like a calcium caseinate from milk. I used to use an egg white protein as well. I use creatine monohydrate. When it first came out, I was still in high school, and it was all about just putting on bulk, you know.
You drink a lot of water too, don't you, with creatine?
You do. And a lot of the bulk is actually water. But that's not a bad thing, because it's intracellular water. It's within the muscle cell itself. So it increases strength and the cell's very hydrated. But over time, it's moved from being the go-to as an athletic supplement, which it still is, but it's moved into a more, I guess, holistic framework. It's good for brain health. It's good for eye health. It's good for heart health. There's countless studies if you're interested on PubMed. But I mean, my mum, who is 75, takes creatine daily. So it's not just for your bros in the gym anymore. I also use a herb called Long Jack. It's like a poor man's HCG. It signals, it mimics FSH and LH, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which basically tells your testicles to produce more testosterone and healthier sperm. Now, when you're on TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, your testicles can shut down. I'm on a very moderate dose, and I've still had kids whilst on it, so it's not obviously a huge problem. But the Long Jack's very good for men and for women, actually, from a sex drive and sex function perspective, but specifically because it's optimizing testosterone. So if you're not ready for TRT, or you don't like the idea of injecting testosterone, or your testosterone's coming down, but it's not at a point where it's bothering you too much, then something like Long Jack can be a really good bridge. And then if you are on TRT, it can be good to supplement with it.
There's so my philosophy around that has been, where I sort of landed on it, is what are the things in my body that are going to just drop off over time? And rather than replacing with the hormones,
Yeah.
what can I take that actually will help my
Boost
body
it?
stimulate?
Okay, so long jack's a great example.
Okay, I didn't know that one. So Tonkat Ali is one.
It's the same herb.
Yep.
It's just different
Oh,
names.
okay, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And there's the agrestis as well.
Yep.
Fidosia agrestis.
Yeah.
So that I do that for the hormone balance.
Yes.
Then a little something to help with the sleep.
Yes.
And
Do you use like a magnesium or
magnesium?
Yeah.
Yes, and another herb, ashwagandha.
Yep. Good stress adaptogen.
Yeah. So to that at night as well. So that I find that helps with a little bit of
Yes.
sleep. And then NMN.
Yep.
I think everyone on the planet is now taking.
Yeah.
And Revisterol.
Yes, that's
well.
great.
Yeah. So that's pretty much
That's a great.
the suite. So it's kind of early days. I tried a few other things, but these were the things that actually good science background.
Yes.
Moderate as far as the sort of philosophy I espouse, but absolutely had a difference.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's great to hear, and I think that's the test. Do you feel different?
Yeah.
Do you perform different? And then are you seeing differences in your blood markers?
Yeah.
And I think because there's the placebo effect is real.
For sure.
It's a good chunk of every pharmaceutical on the market has a large degree of it. There's certain drugs that they think 60% of the efficacy is down to placebo.
Yeah.
Most drugs, it's in the 10 to 20% range. So we don't discount placebo. It's great.
Sure.
But it's also really good if you're seeing it in objective measures.
Yes.
And that could be, can I lift more weight? It could be, can I swim that lap faster? But there's nothing better than seeing changes in your blood markers.
On the workout side, Turk, taking some Turk and some endocrine.
Yes.
As well. So that's the
great.
two things that are just, if I'm doing a heavy workout, I'll take those as well.
Yeah,
Give it
great.
Extra boost. Do you have anything that specifically for your workout that helps you metabolize?
Yeah,
grow?
I do. I use a pre-workout. I'm a bit picky on my pre-workouts because I don't want massive amounts of caffeine. Although I do like, a hit of caffeine.
Yes.
So the one that I use, and it's different for everyone. So I won't mention a particular brand because you sort of got to figure it out for yourself. And I don't want to endorse any particular brand. But the one I use has about 200 milligrams of caffeine, which is roughly equivalent to a double espresso, slightly more, slightly less, depending on how you make your espresso. So it's not a massive hit of caffeine, but then it's got taurine, it's got beta-alanine, it's got a mix of other ingredients that have been proven, to your point, to have some kind of impact on performance. So some of them basically reduce perceived fatigue, some of them buffer lactic acid, some of them are more nootropic, like a caffeine and other certain herbs where you just feel better, you feel more energized. So I think a pre-workout for me is really helpful. I don't use it every single time, but I do like it. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing for training is that the various mushrooms have had a positive impact for me. I just use a 7 mushroom blend now.
Okay.
So there's different research on different mushrooms, and some of them are better researched than others, and some of them have really good impacts on immune function. Some of them impacts on your exercise capacity. Theoretically, at least, not fully proven out yet, your oxygen carrying capacity in the blood. Some have an impact on brain health. So I just decide for an insurance policy, I just take 7.
Right.
It's in a powdered form.
Cover the bases.
That's right. Okay. Too much to know.
Actually, MJ Bale, when I had my operation, sent me a box full of brain food, which I thought was hilarious. There's all sorts of brain things in there. But there's lion's mane.
Lion's mane, yeah.
And I tried it, and I actually do take it as well. But Helen tried it.
Yeah.
And said it absolutely made a difference to her cognitive focus.
Oh, wow.
Like she was amazed at the difference.
That's great.
And I think that's true for some of these things. They seem to work for some people and not for others.
Yes.
Like there's I know it's a physiological difference, or there's something that might be missing in the balance of a diet that seems to make a difference for some and not for others.
Definitely. And we see that with things that some people get hyper after sugar. Some people have a low tolerance for caffeine. Some people get anxious on caffeine. Some people feel great. And some people after 2 glasses of wine are loads of fun. And some of them are telling you the same story they told you 15 minutes ago. So we all respond differently to drugs and to these supplements that we're using as if they were drugs. I mean, we're using these supplements not because we're sick.
Yeah.
We're using them to change the way that we respond to various stresses, and whether that's in our neurochemistry or our muscular function, our VO2 max, our capacity to endure pain, the lactic acid buffers type stuff for endurance work.
Yeah.
So we're using these supplements for a drug-like effect, and therefore I think about it much the way people have highly individual responses to other drugs. Social drugs like caffeine and alcohol, or pharmaceuticals that when we're sick, some people they need more or less ibuprofen or Panadol to get rid of a headache. So I think it is about a level of self-experimentation. The great thing with these various supplements is the lethal dose, the LD50 on these things. They're very safe.
For sure.
Caffeine is probably the most dangerous one. Don't overdo the caffeine too much. Everything else that we're talking about, your worst impact is likely to be gastrointestinal distress.
Yeah.
You feel a bit.
Magnesium's a classic one for that as
Totally.
well. For sure.
Totally.
Yep.
But they're highly unlikely, unless you're incredibly stupid, to result in any long-term damage.
Yeah.
So you experiment with a few different things, work out what suits you and what gives you the results that you're looking for. And then my perspective is just keep doing it until it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. I think that's where I'm at. I've kind of found a reasonable balance for me.
Yes.
I'm just going to do this for a period of time and then relook.
Yeah.
And I think it's an evolving science. It's an evolving market. There's all sorts of different opportunities.
It's evolving really quickly, and there's a lot of rubbish out there too.
Yes.
So one of my go-tos is PubMed. It has there's someone spruiking some new supplement on Instagram or wherever.
That's not going to a pub and asking for medical advice.
It's not, although we've both done that. It doesn't normally end well.
No.
But no, PubMed's great. It's basically every research paper that's ever been published, medical and scientific. So if you find 4 or 5 studies on it and the extract reads well, in a perfect world, we'd all read the whole article, but at least read the extract.
Give it a go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'd say around this, over doing it for so long and helping others through various journeys in terms of health and wellness, is I'm always asked, what is the perfect training modality? And the perfect training modality is whatever you enjoy and can commit to 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah, yeah.
Because consistency trumps everything.
Yeah.
And so if for you it's tennis and long walks, awesome. That's what you should do.
Yeah.
If you can throw in a few kettlebell swings or maybe do some deadlifts or squats once a week or twice a month, that would be great. But we see this all the time where PTs will prescribe, the optimized training regime that is sequenced in a perfect way and moves from strength to conditioning to hypertrophy every 8 weeks. And it's designed beautifully. And people don't enjoy it. They don't stick with it.
No, that's right. Yeah. So that consistency makes it sustainable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Fascinating conversation, Josh. It's been great. I've really enjoyed having you here. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now as far as the advisory work's concerned, because I know we do some work together on MJ Bale.
Yeah.
And you've done some work with Premier and Gazelle and a few others recently. So what are you actually doing and what do you bring to the table?
Yes. So typically I'm working with lifestyle brands, premium business consumer brands, although not exclusively. I've started working with the ecosystem of businesses that work with those brands. So a SaaS technology business that has a platform that sells into brands that basically solves for assortment of merchandising. Also working with a digital agency who sells digital marketing and brand consulting into those sort of companies. So it's lifestyle brand based, but then it's the ecosystem around that.
Okay.
Typically what I'm engaged to do is there's two main reasons I'm typically approached. One is around coaching CEOs. So it's around helping CEOs. I was going to say young and ambitious CEOs, but that's not necessarily true. It's really any CEO or leader within the business who is ambitious and is interested in learning from someone who's had some slightly different experience and can provide different perspectives.
Love that.
And I have a coaching methodology. I have a program that I use, but 9 times out of 10, we end up customizing it because it's quite specific in terms of what they're looking for, or it starts that way at least. And so the CEOs that I'm coaching range from, 25-year-old first-time founders through to, 50-year-old mature executives who are very good at what they do and aren't looking to be taught anything per se. They're just looking for a sounding board who is
100%.
truly objective.
So important.
And it is because you've got, you've got your spouse, you've got your board, you've got your investors, you've got your team. They've all got a slightly different agenda.
Yeah.
When I'm working with the CEO, it's 100% confidential, and I'm just working in the CEO's interests.
Yeah.
So that's proved helpful for the more mature execs, whilst the younger execs or the less experienced execs are more looking for what's the template here? Like, how do I scale this thing?
How does it work?
Like, how do I approach this person who's 10 years older than me, and I really want him or her to join my team, and I just can't imagine why they'd want to. Or this investor is, wanting to renegotiate the deal, and how do I approach that? So there's that for the younger exec with less experience, it's a bit more situational. For the more mature exec, it's typically just that consistent voice of reason, someone to serve as a sounding board.
Yep.
So that's the coaching business. And then the other, and often the coaching leads to what I'm about to speak to next, which is some kind of retained consultancy with the organization. So we've identified opportunities through the coaching work where the CEO or the leader or the board in partnership with the leader are looking for some way to force multiply. So we don't want to go out and hire a senior exec on a permanent basis to come in and help us navigate opening up a new market. We're interested in going to the United States, or we need to re-platform the e-com, and we've just got a really challenging CTO, and we need to make sure that he or she stays within the guardrails. Or we have a great business in apparel, and we want to move into eyewear and scent, but they're licensed deals, and we don't know where to start. So there's some kind of problem where if the CEO had unlimited time, or even the senior exec team had unlimited time, they'd be all over it. But they don't have unlimited time, and they want someone who they can bring in who's sort of been around the block a couple of times, comes with a network of contacts, and can very quickly act as a force multiplier to get things done quickly.
Yep. So you add a lot of value quickly by doing that.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And then some of those turn into ongoing retained advisory roles, and the longest one I've had is 10 years. So I try to be really agile and very flexible to meet the needs of the client.
Yep.
So I keep coming up with these models that I think, okay, well, this is now going to be my model for coaching. This is my model for consulting. But the reality is that we live in a pretty fluid economy.
We do. Changing fast.
Very dynamic, lots of shifts all the time. And I think with the introduction of AI across multiple areas where I'm working, we're seeing that accelerate even more.
For sure.
The economy is a little bit challenging at the moment. There's not quite the access to capital there was. So things are shifting really quickly. And that's always true. Ross, who we mentioned before, Ross Lane, I was chatting to him about a business that we both have an interest in. And he was saying, look, it's, and he'd just been to a board meeting, and the CEO had said, look, it's pretty tough at the moment. And he was saying, I was just reflecting, I've never been to a board meeting in 25 years, good times or bad times, where the CEO said, it's been super easy this month.
So true. It's been a walk in the park.
Yeah.
Yes. Spent most of my time at lunch.
I don't need a bonus. It's too easy. So I think it's always tough. It's just a different version of tough.
For sure.
And it's good to have people around you who can support you navigate that. And that's really all I do.
Love it. It's great. And vital role. Adds a lot of value.
It's tons of fun too.
For sure. I like the variety as well. It's good, isn't it?
Me too.
So a few companies to work on.
Exactly.
Josh Sparks, love your work. Thank you so much for the conversation today. Really enjoyed catching up with you, my friend.
Mark Bilton, my pleasure. I loved it. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you.
Likewise.
Thanks for joining us at the Lead Well, Live Well vodcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you want to know more about what we're all about, you can find us at leadwelllivewell.com.au.